Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Well, engagers, today we have Ibrahim. But before we get started, Ibrahim, are you prepared to engage?
I am totally.
Let's do this because I am very interested in this guest. This is an interview I've been looking forward to for a while because I learned about their company a while ago, and I've been going to a couple of their events as well. Ibrahim Jabary, he is in fact the CEO and one of the founders of this company that I've been looking at, which is called Gamelearn, where he has participated as well in the concept of all the video games in the company. And that is exactly why we wanted to have him on the show. He studied business and also did his MBA, which he did at IE Business School, which, as you know, is where I work and teach as well. I wasn't a professor at the time that Ibrahim was studying. But after his international career in many companies and his experience, of course, at Jabary Consulting, which was a face-to-face training company, or is, I'm not sure if that company is still running. It is a face-to-face training company for managerial skills. He embarked on the adventure of founding Gamelearn in 2007, and this is why he has become a pioneer in the development of video games for corporate learning and is a reference for game-based learning in general. And he was named Innovator of the Year by the Learning Media Group twice. So, Ibrahim, is there anything that we're missing from that intro?
No, I don't think so.
Fantastic. So, Ibrahim, we always like to know a little bit more about our guests. Like, what does a typical day look like? What does your schedule look like in a typical day? Like today, I know now we have changed a bit our schedules in general thanks to all this coronavirus situation. But what would you say your day looked like?
Well, I'm sure it's probably not as interesting as people might think. So I would say most of my day, unfortunately, is meetings. And I would say there's two main kinds of meetings. In one side, there are all the management-related meetings with my team. And the second type would be designing meetings, which are the ones I like. But again, unfortunately, it's not the ones I dedicate most time to. I normally tend to work only when the working hours are over. So when the team goes to rest at 6 or 7 in the afternoon, that's when I have my time. So I can start thinking, I can start working on my concepts and my ideas for the games, and also for all the strategy in the company. So most of my working hours would be dedicated to meetings, and only when those finish, then I can start actually working.
So you have like a dual career here as the CEO in all these meetings, and as well doing all that amazing concepts and all that part that you do for the video games as well, right?
Yeah, I wish I could work more on the games, but also I love the side of the CEO and the strategy for the company. So yeah, in a way, I have to work those two different roles. And I'm doing fine. Hopefully, in the future, we can tell.
I'm sure. And once we get to know you a little bit more, we always like to start strong, as we would say. We would like to talk about a moment, because as you said, you've been doing a lot of meetings. I'm sure this has been shifting and changing throughout the years through all that experience. And we'd like to know of a time, and throughout all of this experience, I'm sure it's been more than just once. We'd like to talk about a time of a fail, a first attempt in learning, or a failure, your favorite failure that, of course, taught you interesting things. Like, what happened? What would you attribute that to? How did you get out of it or learn from that? We'd like to be there with you, sort of relive that moment and learn from it, hopefully, and not commit the same mistakes that you could have done back in the day.
I don't appreciate you making me relive this horrible story. And I have to tell during these 12 years, because Gamelearn's been working for 12 years already, I made so many mistakes, it's difficult for me to choose one. And I hope I was able to learn from most of them. And if I have to pick one, I would go probably for one of the ones I made the sooner. And that was when I was designing my second video game. That was like 10 years ago. And this was a game called Triskelion. Is a course on time management and personal productivity. And that was a nightmare. I think it took us close to 3.5 years to complete that game. And normally it took us 2 years, 1.5 years. And it was completely full of bad stories and bad experiences. But I guess the two main errors I made there, and there were a lot of them, but the two principal ones were, in one side, we outsourced engineering in that project, and we didn't choose wisely. So we ended up working with a couple of companies which didn't deliver, let's call it like that. And it was horrible budget-wise, time-wise, energy-wise. It drove us completely crazy, and it had a huge impact in our clients too, because they were waiting for that course. So basically, we learned from that moment on, we built our own engineering team, and never since then we have outsourced a core, element of the company, which is all the production side of our games. It took us, legal fees. We ended up in court. It was a terrible experience, and we didn't control the quality. We couldn't control the developers. An absolute nightmare. And the second error, and I think that was, game design wise, I think that's a more important lessons for everybody, is that because we were successful in our first game, the second game, we became kind of like too ambitious, and we started making a game that was way too complex. So we wanted to simulate real life. So things just got out of hand, and we ended up working with a game that was too long, too difficult to play. It was full of very interesting things, but they were only interesting for me as a game designer. Interesting for the users. So again, since then we started working on shorter games, easier games, and we started thinking more on the user and the end user, more than the interest and the needs of us as game designers. We always say one things that are not exactly the ones that our players want.
So it's thinking about your users and complexity. I'm thinking on the first one, I think it was very clear that one of the mistakes, at least at that stage that you were in, I'm not sure if you would have. Well, at this point, I'm sure you would have tried to do it differently, but sometimes, externalizing is just a reality. It's something that you have to do. And then maybe it would have been about picking who that was, maybe testing something further. If you can, give us a few pro tips from that experience. I know you then went for your own team, but if there's any tips you can give the audience, the engagers, that would be great. And then, that whole design thing, the game design thing of going for something that is not bigger than you at least at that point that you could manage. I know that's a very, sort of complex concept. Like, how do you know when it is too much? How do you know when it is too little? If there's any pointers you'd like to give out, that would be awesome.
I think it's never too little. I think we always expect people to expect more from our games than they are actually expecting. So we need to understand that the game is built in our minds, and it's never what they expect. And normally, if you have to choose, always choose shorter, always choose easier, always choose faster, because the world we are living in now moves quick, and players want to feel that they are not dedicating more time than is strictly needed to play, to understand, to enjoy your game. So my tip would be, if you have to choose, never go for the complex option. You always go for the shorter, to the cheaper, the faster, the quicker, the easier for the player. And obviously, regarding the first mistake, at that point in time, we didn't have our own engineering team, so there was only the option of outsourcing. And obviously, if I have to give tips, is never work with someone you don't know, or at least you have referrals from. You should run a test first to understand, to see if the people you're going to be working with understand your perspective, understand your needs, and exactly know how you are expecting the result. And the most important thing is that you make sure everybody in this team understand what's the final outcome that you have in mind. So they need to know exactly what you expect the end result to be, because if not, you're going to be having a lot of issues and misunderstandings in the way.
That sounds like it. Understanding, what are the objectives and what's the final product going to look like is something that is definitely fundamental. And taking a shift, I know you've had many successes with your video games. I've seen some of them live, some of the presentations as well. I would love for you to give us a story about one of those successes, like something that you set out to do this game. It went out great. And what would you say are some of the key perspectives, attributes, lessons that you took from that success as well? And feel free to pick any one of the stories that you might have in your in your long career as well.
Okay, well, in this point, it's difficult to choose because I have a lot of love for every single game that we've made, and it's been more than 15 since we started. And the fact is that all of them have worked very well. And obviously, some clients prefer ones over others, and some other clients prefer the others. So it's a matter of taste. It always will be. For me, obviously, my favorite is the first one. It was probably the most difficult one to design because everything was starting back then. We didn't have anyone to look at, no benchmarks, no previous experiences we could copy from, and it was a total and an absolute adventure. And also the subject itself, it was very, very challenging. It was our game called Merchants for negotiation skills. So we needed to build not only the story, but also the simulation to make the player feel he was actually negotiating with the characters in the game. And trying to design that simulation was completely awesome. I mean, it was an experience. It was difficult, but in the end, we were able to offer our clients something really different that nobody had designed or made before, and it worked amazingly. And because it was the first game, and we were also testing, for us was the go from the market. So that was the big trial. In our case, we were trying to prove people would love to learn by playing, and that we were able to design a game that could actually teach. And with Merchants, we were able to do so, and our clients were delighted. And at that point, we knew we have something interesting in our hands, and we started working on it.
That sounds fantastic. It's very, very inspiring as well. And is there, of course, one of the things was obviously that you were one of the first ones to be at that corporate market. And I'm sure that there were many elements of, as an entrepreneur, but as also a game designer that you are at heart as well. Are there any key things that you would say, well, one of the things that we had in this game that we found was very, very successful after the fact was this and this, or the way that we approached this was particularly interesting, maybe compared to other things, or given the fact that it was new? Any, one or two key elements that you would find from that experience?
Well, I think the Merchants game is based on amazing content. So obviously, because we had a very good negotiation course previous to the design of the game, I think that was very important for the success of Merchants. And second, the way we were able to replicate the role plays and the cases that we were using in our face-to-face training while delivering our negotiation course, how we were able to transfer those into the game, into this simulation, I think was the most important factor. And if you look at the game design, I would say that probably when simulating the negotiation, for us, the biggest challenge was not to fall into the normal trend to just use multiple choice options. So to actually make the player feel he was in control of the negotiation, and also not only choosing from different options, but creating his own options. I think that's the biggest thing of merchants. So in fact, after obviously you are, having a conversation with the character you're negotiating with, at some point in the game, you have to start defining and writing down a proposal from scratch. And I think that's the key moment, the key wow moment in this game, because people need to start using their creativity, and they have to start figuring out how they can solve the problem they are trying to solve with this character that you're negotiating with. So I think that's the key element of the game, and probably one of the main reasons for its success.
Absolutely. So providing a lot of freedom to your players, which was something that is, I have to say, technically very challenging, especially for the time. And the other thing is that you were basing this on something that you already had, which is, it kind of is the situation of many of the teachers and professors that might be listening right now, the engagers in the audience, that you already know your content. And here Ibrahim already knew his content very, very well. He had all these role plays, all these things that were already developed and already being used in a face-to-face environment. And this was translated. Part of it, I'm guessing that it was translation, but a large portion of it as well was turning it into, having those affordances. We've talked about this before. What the medium is now allowing you that you weren't able to do face-to-face, and what does, of course, face-to-face allow you that here was not possible, and how do you balance out all these things? I think those are key elements and fantastic ones as well. And Ibrahim, we've been talking about those two projects, the Merchants and the Triskelion. And of course, you mentioned that you've had already, I think it was 15 was the number by now, where we are in 2020, mid-2020. I'm guessing that you have some sort of process, some sort of structure or framework that you follow when you're creating these games, especially, again, as you were saying, from the game design perspective. Like, do you follow some structure of somebody else? Have you created your own? How much of this can you share with us? We would be delighted to know how that works. Like, get into your head a little bit if you were creating tomorrow a course on something new.
Well, again, as I said before, we weren't able to actually copy nobody, and we could not, take other references to build our game-based learning courses. We ended up building our own flow, and it's not that difficult. It's always, I think, everything is pretty much common sense, and as you were saying right before, the most important thing when you're building a video game for training, you need to have awesome content. If you don't have content, then it doesn't matter if your story rules. It doesn't matter if the game mechanics are awesome. In the end, the course is not going to be effective, because you're building a game to teach. And if you don't teach anything, then you didn't accomplish your main goal. So the first thing is you need to understand what you're teaching. You need to own your content. From that point, then you can move on. If you don't have that as a first step, you will end up with a very bad, gamified course. So first thing in our case, we always start with the content. So we write down what exactly we want the students to learn, and then this is very, very important. We decide how we want them to practice it. So it's not only about transferring information, it's not only about the theory, but we always think on how can we make our students practice what they have learned through the lessons, for example. So in a way, because we are trainers at heart, we know that learning happens when you are practicing and when you are receiving feedback. So after defining exactly what people need to learn, then we start defining how people are going to be practicing those lessons and how we're going to be giving them feedback about what they're doing right and what they can improve. And so once we have these two first steps, then only then we start thinking about game mechanics and the story. So those would be the third and fourth steps. So first content, then the practice or the simulation, then the game mechanics, and in the end, we wrap up everything with an interesting story to accomplish the engagement. So in a way, always looking for effectiveness through good content and good practicing exercises and cases and feedback, and then a good engagement with game mechanics and storytelling and rankings and competitions and you know.
Absolutely. It sounds very, very sound in that sense, as you were saying. Of course, first understanding what it is that all that content, all those learning objectives, getting them set very, very well, very, very clear. Then, of course, you want to see what are those things going to translate into actions. I like to call those as well desired actions. What are the things that you want your learners to actually do so that they learn what you want them to learn? And then, of course, you start getting into things like the game mechanics and the theme. Some people like to start with the theme. It seems like in your process, you are more of a game mechanics and how the whole dynamic is going to be working, and then wrapping it around with a very, very nice theme, which I have to say you should check it out in their webpage. The themes of Gamelearn are pretty fantastic, at least as far as I've seen them to this point.
Thank you.
Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement.
So Ibrahim, again, we've been talking about all your experience. How do you do these things? And I would like to know if there's what you would call perhaps something like a best practice, something that when you're creating these game-based learning solutions, you would say, well, if you think about it this way, or if you follow the process that you were mentioning before, or if you think about these things, the project will probably be a lot better than if you didn't. Would you say there is such an element?
Well, I guess probably following the 4 steps and never missing one, that would be probably what my advice would be. And for me, if you think that all of us, trainers and teachers and instructional designers, we know the content and probably we know how we want our students to practice the content. What I would always advise is you need to build a good story. So that will make the students love it. So if they learn and they have fun, those are your 2 main goals. Then you're going to be having our completion rates. They are way over 90%. If you look at the average completion rates in the market for traditional learning, we are talking about 25-30%. And this, I think, has to do a lot with this concept that we've been dealing with. It's good content, good teaching, and good pedagogy, and then a very nice story to make sure that people feel engaged and they want to finish the course.
Absolutely. That's always a worry when you go into the world of MOOCs or e-learning or whatever that's going to look like. Completion rates are always a big worry because those numbers tend to be quite troubling when you want to make sure that people go through whatever that training is going to look like. And after hearing these questions, after sort of feeling the things that you've seen around this podcast, is there somebody you would like to listen to answering these questions? Another guest that you would like to suggest for Professor Game for this podcast?
I think there's probably one person. He's not related to game-based learning, but he's probably one of my first references since I started, thinking about building games and also playing games. So for me, Tim Schafer or Safer, I don't know how you call it, from Double Fine Productions. He worked at the LucasArts for a very long time. He designed Green Fandango and Psychonauts and Broken Age and co-designed the Monkey Island saga. So for me, to listen to that guy, he knows about the sector, he knows about building games, he's awesome screenwriter, and he's also very fun to listen to. And also, he's a guy who brought humor to video games in a way that nobody did before. I think it would be awesome to listen to this person.
He sounds like very, very exciting person to listen to. Definitely. So we'll add him definitely to the list and see if we can have him on the podcast in the future. And I will let you know if he comes in so that you can listen to that one as well. And in that same sense of recommendations, is there a book that you would recommend to this audience? Again, people who are interested in game-based learning and these kinds of strategies. Again, it could be directly related to that, or it could be something that is not directly related. However you wanna take that, and of course, tell us why you would recommend that book.
I think the book that I think of right now is not actually directly related to game design, but still I think it's 100% applicable, and that's the lean startup. So the whole lean concept is totally applicable to our games, and when you're designing a game and you're thinking about your game mechanics and how you launch it. Also, I am fortunate enough to work with web browser based in online games that allow me to make a lot of changes while the game is already in the market. So this helps me a lot. But if you have that possibility to build your game as you would build a lean startup, from your MVP, the advice in the book about how you add up and you work with your players and your users, I think that's awesome advice that is 100% applicable to game design too.
Absolutely. And in fact, I've mentioned this before. I think somebody has mentioned that book before. And given that we are in this space, there is a book. I don't know if you know of Amy Jo Kim. She was one of the game designers in Rock Band or some of those games. And she's been at many of those things. And now she has something that she calls game thinking, which I would say is kind of an evolution or a different path after, it considers all of the concepts of lean startup, lean thinking, and all of these concepts, and takes it as well to a sort of new level as well when you think about it through as well the lens of game design, which is a big part of her experience. And she helps a lot of innovators do these kinds of things. I would say that would be a nice follow-up as well to the lean startup. She's a good friend. And, when we're talking about these recommendations, it's hard not to ask in a podcast like this one, and in this world that we're at, it's hard not to ask, what would you say is your favorite game? And I know this one is a very difficult question, but, your most recent, your oldest favorite game, however you want to approach this question is fine by us. We're all into talking about games, so that's good.
Okay, you have to understand that I am an old guy, and I've been playing games for quite a long time right now. It's really, really difficult. I played, probably the first games ever, and it's very difficult for me to choose. For me, I would say, because of different reasons, 3 games that I love. One would be Civilization from Sid Meier, then Little Big Planet because of the concept, and Uncharted as one of the modern games. But I played with these old games I just loved, like SimCity or The Lemmings or Mario Bros, Half-Life, Dune, and of course Monkey Island. So this huge amount of them I love. And then also, if you look at only the design, you choose ones. If you look at aesthetics, you would be choosing different ones. For me, aesthetic-wise, I would say The Journey or BioShock Infinite or Monument Valley or Broken Age, and game mechanics. So there's I couldn't choose. If you ask me what my favorite book, I couldn't tell you. If you ask my favorite movie, I couldn't, because I love so many of them.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in the world we're at right now with so many awesome games, like the whole series of Uncharted, which which you kind of mentioned as well. I've gotten locked into that. I recently bought it has 2 or 3 of the Uncharted in a single game, and I'm starting to play that as well on my PlayStation.
I have to say that I'm worried a little bit, because although there's this huge amount of new video games coming up every day, I am a little bit worried because I see huge lack of creativity. So you end up, I don't know if it's a matter of the sector only financing those games that are either, sequels or maybe things that they think they are going to be working for sure. But it's difficult to find in the stores. And I'm not talking about indie, because obviously indie But yeah, it worries me so much that we end up, having these first shooters and a little bit of strategy, a little of sports and driving, and this I'm missing something new. I'm missing people with interesting ideas, different ideas. It happens in the movie sector too, and I think it's a pity.
Yeah, absolutely. I could name a couple of things that have raised my interest in that sense as well. Recently, for example, I was in the Madrid Games Week. Well, not so recently anymore. And one of the things that I saw is the game that's not even yet released as well was when they were showing the VR of Iron Man, where you are. I mean, I saw very little of it. I couldn't even get to play it. The queue was huge, and I only had one day. But the way it was played was very, very different because you are in VR and you are actually flying and all these things that you could do. It seemed pretty awesome, especially again because it's in this level of modernity. It's a relatively new game. And the other thing is, I would point you to games like the ones that are being done by Jesse Schell. And the interesting thing is that they still have a lot of that indie sense, that they're not by any capacity. I wouldn't say that they're a AAA studio. They are relatively large, but they're still quite indie, and they are experimenting a lot in the VR world as well. There's I Expect You to Die is a game that they were recently doing, and it's sort of a, I don't know how if I can call it and it's sort of escape room in which you're sort of a secret agent, and then they have there's another one that is a sword fighting game that they're using a lot right now again, and it's also on VR. So there's interesting things that are coming up, and I do think, as you were mentioning, that it's might be an interesting opportunity for the indie studios to be getting into the field and be breaking into the field and doing new things. So Ibrahim, I think we do have a few minutes, and I would definitely, I found a random question from the audience, and given your background, I do think it could be something interesting to tackle with you. This question comes from Scott Beatty, who is a listener, and he sent this question. Looks very simple, but I'm sure it has a lot of depth as well. So approach it as you wish. He's saying, can you please talk about low-cost strategies for games and learning? How would you approach it if somebody came up and said, well, I know your games are incredible and massive as well, but if somebody came up with this sort of low-cost strategy or low complexity strategy, what would you recommend? What would you tell to these kinds of people?
Well, I understand the question because it's probably one of the main troubles that we were facing in the past. As I said before, it took us 2 years average to be able to design and develop one of our games. And obviously, when you're trying to teach and when you're trying to use video games as a training format, you need to be more scalable than that. So it's in a way lucky. In the other hand, you have to allow me that if you're asking me right now what would be a very quick and very cheap way of producing your own video games, and also I can add with the quality that Gamelearn has been offering in the past. The good news is that next month we are going to be launching our editor. The editor is basically a tool that will allow you to build a video game without writing a single line of code. So it's basically kind of a Lego system. You will be connecting blocks. You'll be basically choosing from different scenarios from a library, different characters, and we have, dozens of them to be chosen from. And in fact, our latest games have been designed using this same tool. So it's basically a tool that we've been using for the past 6 to 8 months. And now we are releasing it. So anybody out there, any teacher, any instructional designer, any trainer who's willing to transform his own e-learning content or even face-to-face content into a video game format, he can do so using this. And I have to tell you, it's taking me less than 2 weeks to build my latest courses that have been released in the market. So I think that's pretty appropriate as an answer. As a sales pitch. So, well, you can, if you follow us probably in the coming 15 days, you're going to have a lot of information about this new tool. And that is really, I'm telling you, it's awesome.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And a couple of disclaimers here. The first one is I did not have this information beforehand. The second one is Ibrahim did not know I was going to make this question as well. So it's, incredible how serendipity every now and then kicks in and it has these kinds of opportunities. And it sounds actually amazing. I've been following a few of the things that are being done there. I don't know if you've heard of the RPG Maker, which is pretty cool. There's things like Branch Track, but I'm sure what you guys are releasing is going to be amazing. And if it's what you're using for your video games, I'm pretty confident it'll have a lot of not only success, but it'll allow a lot of people to have success doing their own thing. So thank you very much for that one. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for quite a few. However, before we take off, before we finish this interview, I want to make sure that people know where to find Ibrahim, where to find Gamelearn. Like, let us know where we can find you. If you have any final piece of advice, also please let us know before we finish and take off for today.
Okay, so well, if you guys want any kind of information about the company or the new tool that we are releasing, then you can search for us in Google, Gamelearn, or www.game-learn.com. And also you could write to me to info@game-learn.com, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you might have. And also through I guess probably through your cast, they might be able also to contact me if they need so.
Absolutely. We will put all of that information available in the show notes. So also, if you go to professorgame.com, you'll find a list of links to all of the things that Ibrahim has been mentioning right now, and you'll be able to see all of that information there. So thank you again very much, Ibrahim, for investing this time with us, with the engagers in this podcast, delivering all that value that you've been delivering throughout the interview, even the latest news that we're getting from Gamelearn releasing this thing that looks pretty awesome, at least before we get to see it. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And how are you listening to this podcast? If you are doing so through a podcasting app, have you subscribed? Have you rated this podcast? Please do so. That way we can get better discoverability in the app, and we can get more engagers like you to achieve our mission. What is our mission? Making learning amazing. If you want the instructions, go to professorgame.com/iTunes. And before you go on to your next mission, go ahead, please subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.